There is a moment in almost every relationship where something shifts, and the strange thing about that moment is that it rarely announces itself in any obvious way. No one tells you that they see you differently now. No one sits you down and explains that something about your presence has weakened. And yet, if you are paying attention, you can feel it. The tone changes, the energy changes. The way people respond to you becomes slightly more distant, slightly less invested, slightly less respectful. And what makes this moment dangerous is not the shift itself, but how you respond to it. Most people react by trying harder. They become more attentive, more accommodating, more understanding. They increase their effort, believing that if they just show more care, more patience, more emotional awareness, things will return to how they were. But what they do not realize is that this instinctive reaction is exactly what deepens the problem. Because the loss of respect does not come from a lack of effort, it comes from something far more subtle, something that operates beneath behavior, beneath intention, and even beneath awareness. This is the pattern that Carl Jung spent much of his work trying to understand, a pattern that reveals how easily a person can lose their psychological center without ever noticing that it has happened. If you observe yourself carefully, especially in moments where you want to be liked, accepted, or valued, you will notice a shift in your internal state. Your attention becomes more outwardly focused. You begin to monitor the other person more closely. You pay attention to their tone, their expressions, their pauses. You start interpreting what they might be thinking, what they might be feeling, and how they might be judging you. At first, this feels like awareness. It feels like emotional intelligence. It feels like you are being thoughtful and considerate. But underneath that surface, something much more significant is happening. Your center is no longer located within you. It has moved outward. Now your sense of stability begins to depend on their reactions. If they respond warmly, you feel grounded. If they seem distant, you feel uncertain. If they withdraw, you feel a kind of internal imbalance that you cannot immediately explain. And because this process happens gradually, it rarely feels like a loss of control. It feels like you are simply responding to the situation. But what is actually happening is that you are no longer acting from yourself. You are reacting from them. This is where the problem begins, because when your center shifts outside of you, your presence begins to weaken, not in a visible way, but in a psychological one. You become more adjustable, more reactive, more dependent on feedback. And while this may seem like it should bring people closer, it often has the opposite effect. Because people do not respond to effort in the way you expect. They respond to something far less obvious, but far more powerful. They respond to presence. And presence cannot exist in a state of constant adjustment. What makes this even more complex is that this pattern is not something you consciously chose. It is something you developed over time, often without realizing it, as a way of navigating the world. From a very early age, most people learn that certain behaviors are rewarded while others are discouraged. Being agreeable is praised. Being easy to deal with is appreciated. Being emotionally convenient makes interactions smoother. And gradually, without any deliberate decision, you begin shaping yourself into a version that fits those expectations. Jung described this version as the persona, a kind of social identity that allows you to function within society. The persona is not inherently negative. It serves a purpose. It helps you interact, cooperate, and communicate effectively. But the problem arises when you begin to mistake this constructed version of yourself for your entire identity. Because in order to maintain that version, you have to suppress everything that does not align with it. Your frustration becomes something you hide. Your needs become something you minimize. Your boundaries become something you soften. And over time, these suppressed elements do not disappear, they accumulate. This accumulation forms what Jung referred to as the shadow. The shadow is not simply a collection of negative traits. It is a repository of everything you have rejected about yourself in order to be accepted by others. And because these aspects are not acknowledged consciously, they do not disappear. Instead, they continue to influence your behavior from beneath the surface. You may notice this influence in moments where your reactions feel disproportionate, when a small change in someone's behavior triggers a strong emotional response, when you feel attached to someone more quickly than you expected, when you experience jealousy, insecurity, or anxiety in ways that seem inconsistent with how you see yourself. These are not random occurrences. They are expressions of parts of yourself that have not been integrated. And this is where another important psychological mechanism comes into play: projection. When you do not recognize certain traits within yourself, you begin to perceive them in others. But this perception is not neutral, it is charged with emotional significance. You do not simply notice these traits, you become drawn to them. You may find yourself deeply attracted to someone's confidence, not realizing that it reflects a part of you that has not been developed. You may admire someone's independence because you have become overly dependent on external validation. You may feel captivated by someone's emotional intensity because you have learned to suppress your own. In these moments, it feels like you are connecting with something outside of yourself, but in reality, you are responding to something within yourself that has not been fully expressed. This creates a powerful dynamic, because now your sense of completeness becomes tied to another person. When they are present, you feel more aligned. When they withdraw, you feel a sense of loss that is difficult to explain. And because you are not fully aware of the underlying mechanism, you interpret this as a need for them rather than a signal about yourself. As a result, you invest more energy. You think about them more. You analyze their behavior more. You try to understand them deeply. And with each layer of attention, your focus moves further away from yourself. This is where the feeling of exhaustion begins to emerge. Not physical exhaustion, but psychological fatigue. Because your attention, which is one of your most valuable internal resources, is no longer concentrated, it is dispersed across multiple external points. You are not just thinking your own thoughts, you are carrying the weight of imagined conversations, anticipated reactions, and unresolved interpretations. Jung described this as a misdirection of psychic energy. Your internal energy is being allocated externally, often without any conscious decision. And because this process is continuous, your system never fully resets. You remain in a state of low-level tension, constantly processing, constantly adjusting, constantly anticipating. This is why you can feel drained even when nothing significant has happened. Your energy has been spent not in action, but in attention. The shift begins when you start to notice this pattern, not intellectually, but experientially. When you become aware of how often your mind leaves you and attaches itself to someone else's perception, something changes. You begin to see that the problem is not the situation itself, but the direction of your focus. And this awareness creates a choice. You can continue the pattern, allowing your attention to flow outward automatically, or you can begin to bring it back. At first, this feels unnatural. There is a kind of discomfort in not reaching outward, in not checking, in not analyzing. It can feel like something is missing, like you are neglecting something important. But what you are actually experiencing is the absence of a habit, not the absence of connection. As you remain in this state, something begins to stabilize. Your thoughts become less reactive. Your emotional state becomes less dependent on external cues. You begin to observe rather than immediately respond. And gradually, your center starts to reestablish itself within you. This shift is subtle, but its effects are significant. Because when your center is internal, your presence changes. You are no longer moving in response to every fluctuation. You are no longer adjusting constantly to maintain alignment. Instead, you become more consistent, more grounded, more stable in your own state. This stability creates what can only be described as psychological weight. It is not something you perform. It is something that emerges naturally when your attention is no longer fragmented. When your energy is not leaking outward, it accumulates. And that accumulation is felt by others, even if they cannot articulate why. People begin to respond differently, not because you are trying to influence them, but because you are no longer dependent on influencing them. There is a difference between interacting from a place of need and interacting from a place of stability. When you no longer need a specific response, your behavior becomes less forced. Your communication becomes clearer. Your presence becomes more defined. And as a result, the dynamics around you begin to shift. This does not mean that relationships become effortless or that you no longer experience emotional responses. It means that those responses are no longer controlling you in the same way. You still feel, you still care, but you are not governed by those feelings to the extent that you lose your center. This is where the integration of the shadow becomes essential, because reclaiming your center is not just about redirecting your attention, it is about acknowledging the parts of yourself that have been influencing you unconsciously. When you begin to recognize your own need for validation, your own capacity for insecurity, your own desire for control, you are no longer at the mercy of those forces. You can see them as they arise, you can understand their origin, and you can choose how to respond. This does not eliminate them. It transforms your relationship to them. Instead of reacting automatically, you respond deliberately. Instead of being pulled, you remain grounded. And this is where a fundamental shift occurs. You stop trying to maintain an image. You stop trying to preserve a version of yourself that was built for acceptance. You begin to operate from something more stable, more consistent, more real. And this has a direct impact on how others perceive you. Because respect is not generated by effort. It is generated by consistency, clarity, and stability. When your behavior is not driven by constant adjustment, it becomes more predictable in a positive way. Not predictable in the sense of being boring, but in the sense of being reliable. People know where you stand. They know how you respond. They know that your state is not easily influenced. This creates trust, and trust is one of the foundations of respect. At the beginning, we looked at the moment when respect begins to fade, the subtle shift that occurs when your presence weakens. Now the pattern becomes clearer. It is not that people suddenly decide to value you less. It is that your internal structure changes in a way that makes you less grounded. And when you are less grounded, your presence becomes less defined. The solution then is not to care less, to withdraw completely, or to detach from others. It is to return to yourself, to bring your attention back, to recognize where your energy is going, to understand the parts of yourself that you have been avoiding, and to integrate them in a way that allows you to remain whole. Because the moment you stop abandoning yourself in the process of connecting with others, something shifts. Your presence stabilizes, your energy consolidates, and for the first time, you are not trying to be seen. You are simply standing in a place where you exist.